I've never been someone who believes in the paranormal, or anything that can't be explained by logic. I work as a land surveyor, which means I spent most of my time in remote areas, mapping out terrain that hasn't been touched in decades. About 2 years ago, I was assigned to a project in a deep valley in the north, a place where the geography trapped the fog for almost the entire day. It was a strange environment. The silence there wasn't peaceful. It was heavy. Every sound, from the snap of a twig to my own breathing, seemed to be muffled by the thick, gray air. Because I work alone, I always wear a body cam. It's standard procedure to document boundary markers and terrain features. I usually talk to the camera while I work, just to keep track of my notes, and honestly, to keep myself company in that isolation. On the third day of the survey, I was pushing through a dense thicket that led to a ridge on the western side of the valley. As I climbed higher, the fog got thicker. I started to get that prickling sensation on the back of my neck, that feeling that your eyes aren't the only ones looking at the landscape. I stopped several times to look back, but I saw nothing but the blurred outlines of trees. Around 2:15 p.m., I was crouched down, clearing some brush to set a GPS marker, when a voice came from the fog, not more than 10 feet away. "Is this private property?" I jumped, my heart nearly hitting my ribs. A man was standing there, wearing a dull, weathered hunting jacket. He didn't have a rifle or a dog. He was just standing there with his hands in his pockets. What struck me as odd was his posture. He was leaning forward slightly, staring not at me, but at the expensive equipment in my hands. I took a breath and tried to sound professional. "I'm just doing a government survey, sir. Are you local?" He didn't answer right away. He just kept staring. Then he whispered, "You're recording everything, aren't you?" I told him it was for work and that the footage was uploaded to a cloud server automatically. I lied about that part, hoping it would discourage any bad intentions. He just nodded slowly and stood there, watching me pack up my gear. His eyes didn't have that normal human curiosity. They were cold, calculating. I decided to end my shift early. I said goodbye and started heading back down the trail. After walking about 50 yards, I looked back. He was gone, or so I thought. But as I kept walking, I realized the sounds of the forest weren't matching my footsteps. There was a slight delay, a soft thud of a boot on damp earth right after my own step. I stopped dead in my tracks. The sound stopped a split second later. I didn't look back this time. I just started walking faster, and the footsteps behind me mirrored my pace. When I broke into a jog, I could hear the brush rustling behind me. Whoever it was, they were no longer trying to be quiet. I reached my truck, locked the doors immediately, and drove until I reached a gas station with bright lights. I felt like an idiot for being so scared, until I got to my hotel and opened the footage. I fast-forwarded to the part where I left the man, and my blood turned to ice. In the video, as soon as I turned my back to walk away, the man didn't stay put. He began following me, but he was doing something deeply disturbing. He wasn't just walking. He was crouched low to the ground, moving with a terrifying agility. Every time I glanced back over my shoulder, he would instantly drop behind a tree or a rock. He was using the fog and the blind spots of my peripheral vision like a professional. But the worst part was the end of the clip. Right as I was fumbling for my keys at the truck, the camera caught him standing at the edge of the tree line. He wasn't hiding anymore. He was standing perfectly still, holding a long, rusted piece of rebar he must have picked up near my work site. He was less than 15 feet away from me, just watching me struggle with the lock. He didn't attack. He just stood there, watching me escape, with a blank expression that haunts me to this day. I called the police, but they found nothing. No camp, no vehicle, no record of anyone living in that valley. I quit that job a month later. People ask me why I won't go hiking or camping anymore. I just tell them that I've spent enough time in the woods. But the truth is, I can't stand the thought of being in the fog and hearing a footstep that isn't mine. I work as a smart home technician, installing high-end automation systems for luxury apartments. Because I spend my days working with sensors, wiring, and logic gates, I don't believe in ghosts. To me, every unexplained noise in a house is just a mechanical failure or a software bug. A few months ago, I got a call from a client named Marcus. He had just moved into a renovated penthouse downtown. He was convinced the apartment was glitching in a way that felt targeted. He told me the smart lights would dim to 10% at exactly 2 a.m. The thermostat would drop to freezing levels while he slept, and most unsettling, his motion sensors would trigger in the hallway, even when he was alone in his bedroom with the door locked. I told him it was likely a faulty Zigbee bridge or a script error, but Marcus was genuinely terrified. He stopped sleeping there and stayed at a hotel, paying me a premium to go in at night and run a full diagnostic. I arrived at the penthouse around 11 p.m. The place was beautiful, but it felt cold, sterile. I started my check in the living room. Everything looked normal until I reached the main media closet. This was a small, windowless utility room at the end of a corridor where all the servers and network hubs were housed. As I got closer, I didn't smell ozone or burning wires. I smelled something organic, something stale, like unwashed clothes and old food. I pulled out my phone to record the diagnostic process, partly for my report, and partly to show Marcus there was nothing to fear. I spoke quietly to the camera. Okay, I'm at the main hub now, checking the wiring. Everything seems secure. I stepped inside and moved the server rack away from the wall to check the cooling fans. That's when I saw it. Behind the rack, there was a small maintenance hatch that wasn't on the original floor plan. It was slightly ajar. On the floor next to it was a thin sleeping bag, a few empty water bottles, and a tablet plugged directly into Marcus's private network. My heart began to thud against my chest, but I didn't scream. I just kept the camera pointed at the hatch. Suddenly, a hand reached out from the dark space behind the wall. It wasn't a monster. It was just a man, thin, wearing a dirty, high-visibility vest. He didn't look like a genius. He just looked desperate and angry. He didn't say anything cinematic. He just stared at me with wide, bloodshot eyes and whispered one thing. "Tell him, I want my final check." I didn't wait to hear more. I backed out of the room, slammed the door, and held the handle shut with all my weight. I could hear him scrambling on the other side, trying to push his way out. But he wasn't laughing. He was cursing, a low, rhythmic swearing that sounded like a chant. I called the police immediately. By the time they arrived and forced the door open, the room was empty. The man had retreated back through the maintenance tunnels, a network of service crawl spaces that connected the entire floor. It turned out he was a subcontractor from the renovation crew who had been fired without pay. He didn't leave the building. He just found a blind spot in the utility layout and stayed there, using the smart home app to harass Marcus as a form of revenge. Marcus sold the penthouse a week later. As for me, I still do the same job, but I never just check the wiring anymore. I check the floor plans. I check the crawl spaces. Because now I know. The most dangerous thing in your home isn't a glitch in the system. It's the person who knows how to hide, right behind the machinery. I'm the kind of person who travels constantly for work. A few months ago, I rented a small suburban house for a short-term stay to finish a design project. The neighborhood was quiet, the kind of place where people lock their doors and turn off the lights by 9 p.m. My rental was at the end of a dead-end street, surrounded by high wooden fences. Since I always struggle to sleep in new places, I tend to stay up very late working. On my second night there, around 1:30 a.m., I heard a strange noise coming from the front yard. It wasn't a normal footstep. It was a rhythmic, light tapping. Clack, 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 against the wooden fence. I turned off my desk lamp and peeked through the slit in the living room curtains. Under the dim glow of the street lamp, I saw a man in a dark navy windbreaker. He was standing right against the fence, holding a metal tape measure. He was measuring, yes, measuring the distance from the gate to my front door. I felt a bit uneasy, but I tried to rationalize it. Maybe he was a utility worker or a surveyor doing overtime. However, when he finished, he didn't leave. He stood under the lamp, staring at my window for 5 solid minutes before disappearing into the shadows. The next night, it happened again. This time, he didn't have a tape measure. He stood in the middle of the road, facing the house, and began to walk. He took very short, slow steps, muttering something under his breath. I stood behind the door, my heart pounding. I wondered if I should call the police, but he wasn't technically doing anything illegal. He was just walking on a public street. Curiosity mixed with fear made me do something I now realize was incredibly stupid. I decided to record him to show the landlord. I cracked the front door open just an inch, enough for my phone lens to see out. I hit record. The man was still there, his back to me. "Hey, what are you doing out there?" I shouted, hoping to scare him off. He froze, but he didn't run. He slowly turned around. What made my blood run cold was that he was wearing a medical mask covering his face, and in his hand was a small notebook. He started walking toward me, not running, not charging, just walking with a perfectly steady pace, and he started counting out loud. 12, 11, 10, 9. Each number matched a single step. He was counting down the distance to reach me. I slammed the door, locked every bolt, and ran into my bedroom, locking that door too. I heard his footsteps hit the porch. 3, 2, 1, 0. Silence followed, then the sound of a pencil scratching against wood right outside the door. I sat on my bed, gripping a pair of scissors, not daring to breathe until sunrise. When it was light out, I gathered my courage and opened the front door. The man was gone, but on the wood, right next to the handle, there was a small note written in pencil. 14 steps, no alarm, 1 a.m. I checked out immediately and went to the police. They checked the neighborhood security cameras and found that he had been watching the house for weeks. He wasn't a typical thief. He was a scout for a professional burglary ring with an obsessive-compulsive habit of mapping targets. What haunts me the most is when the police found his notebook dropped nearby. The last page had my name on it, with a short note. Slow reaction time. Re-engageable. Since then, no matter where I stay, I check the locks 3 times before bed, and I never, ever open the door for any sound coming from the shadows behind the fence. I work as a freelance graphic designer, so staying up until 2 or 3 a.m. to hit deadlines is part of the routine. This happened on a Tuesday night. I finished work at my downtown office and called a rideshare to head home. It had started to drizzle. The air was cold, and the streets were unnervingly empty. A few minutes later, the app notified me that my ride had arrived. It was a silver sedan. The plate matched the info on my screen. I opened the back door and hopped in, shaking my wet umbrella while giving a polite greeting. "Hey, going to the address on the app, please." The driver didn't respond. He just gave a slight nod, his head buried under a low-pulled baseball cap and a surgical mask. I didn't think much of it. Night shift drivers are often exhausted and not in the mood for small talk. The car began to move. About 5 minutes into the ride, I started to feel that something was off. The first thing was the smell. There was a very strange odor in the car. It wasn't air freshener or cigarette smoke. It was the smell of damp, old cloth, mixed with the sharp chemical scent of turpentine. I tried to roll down the window to get some air, but the power window button was disabled. I looked up at the rearview mirror to ask the driver to open it for me, but I realized the interior mirror had been tilted away at a sharp angle, as if the driver didn't want to look at me, or didn't want me to see anything in the back. Then came the sound. Besides the rain tapping on the roof, I heard breathing, but it wasn't coming from the front. It was coming from right beneath my feet. A heavy, wheezing breath, like someone trying to suppress pain or excitement. I froze. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel the pulse in my temples. Slowly, very slowly, I leaned down to look through the gap between the driver's seat and the floor. Under the flicker of a passing streetlight, I saw a hand, a bare, veiny hand gripping the base of the driver's seat. There was a person lying flat on the floor behind the driver's seat, and they were looking directly up at me. I didn't scream. My knowledge of true crime files taught me that if I panicked now, the driver and the person on the floor would act immediately. I pulled out my phone and pretended to take a call. I spoke loudly. "Hey, Mom? Yeah. I'm just turning into the alley. Is my brother waiting at the gate? Tell him to stay right there. I'm getting out now." I noticed the driver's grip tighten on the steering wheel when I mentioned my brother. As the car slowed down to go over a speed bump near a well-lit gas station, I didn't wait for it to stop. I pulled the manual lock. Thankfully, the physical latch still worked, and threw myself out of the car while it was still moving at a low speed. I hit the wet pavement hard and sprinted toward the gas station. The silver sedan didn't stop. It accelerated instantly and vanished into the rain. When the police arrived and checked the records, they found out the actual driver of that car had been hijacked and robbed 2 hours earlier. The man driving me and the person on the floor were accomplices. They were using stolen cars to abduct late-night commuters. The police found the car abandoned in a suburban scrapyard the next morning. Inside, they found a roll of heavy-duty duct tape, a pair of bolt cutters, and a smartphone on a tripod, set to record, positioned right on the floor where that person had been lying. Since that night, I never get into a car without checking the back seat and the floorboards first. Your intuition never lies to you. If you feel like there's a third person in a space meant for two, you're probably right.